Our memories are what gives us our strong sense of self. One of my most formative early childhood memories is of all the times my mom took us as a family to visit my great-grandma at a nursing home. As I remember the residents' faces and everything about that environment, the thing I remember most clearly is the confusion. It was the confusion I saw in their eyes about who we were, where they were, and everything that was going on around them. And it became my confusion too. I was old enough to know that dementia isn't normal, but too young to completely understand it. I've spent much of my life wondering if, or even when, this would happen to me too. And as a consequence, the thing I've feared most in life is losing my grip on reality. When I grew up, I came to understand that brain disorders aren't just something that happens when you get old, but are actually a diverse and complex set of conditions that can happen to anyone at any time. A brief reflection should bring to mind someone you know that suffers from a serious brain disorder. The question I'd like to ask is if you understand what it is that makes them different from you. Each of us begins life imagining the things we need to do to be as strong, smart, and successful as possible. But none of us has ever wished to wake up to having suddenly lost what strength or intelligence we already have. Despite our wishes, about 1 in 5 of us will experience some sort of nervous system disorder in our lifetime. Whether this means periodically and unpredictably losing consciousness due to epileptic seizures, losing the ability to read or write due to advancing symptoms of Parkinson's disease, enduring the crippling fog that accompanies various mood disorders, or the terrifying inevitability of forgetting everything you hold dear due to Alzheimer's disease. Each of these examples is a grim possibility for every one of us. Until quite recently, these disorders were not only incurable, but also untreatable, and sufferers were often cast out of society completely. I'm here to represent the engineers and the scientists who believe that brain-computer interfaces and neuroprosthetics are the technologies that will change this reality for those that are still suffering from nervous system disorders today. It's the potential for this technology to restore quality of life rather than enhance it that makes our work so necessary. We're well on our way toward building replacement parts for the broken brain. But the story that I want to tell today isn't of some breakthrough technology that was achieved this year, but rather of a tremendous effort that spanned the better part of a century and started with a brilliant surgeon and football player named Wilder Penfield. Penfield's probably best known for helping to make what we call a homunculus, which is a sensory and motor map of the human cerebral cortex. But listen as I describe his experience treating a patient. A young woman of 26 who worked as an office secretary had been having a series of epileptic attacks that were always preceded by a warning feeling and an intense fear. Later, after being admitted to Penfield's clinic and laid on the operating table under local anesthesia, a section of her scalp and skull were pulled back and a battery and a pair of wires were applied to cause a gentle electrical current to flow into different parts of her brain. This was done with the goal of identifying which parts of her brain were responsible for the premonitions and hopefully the seizures too. Of all the locations that were tested, some caused small motor movements or touch sensations in different parts of her body. One location in particular was unlike any other. Immediately after the electrodes were inserted, she said, "I hear some music. It's like radio." She later detailed that she heard the song right from the beginning and could remember so much more of it right there in the operating room than she could have otherwise. She said, "It's like it's being played by an orchestra, as though she actually heard it." Over the years that followed, Penfield used this method to identify which regions of the brain caused seizures so that they could be cut out in an effort to prevent them. Surprisingly, though, he discovered that through the use of applied electrical currents, we could interact with real human memories. This method made individuals re-experience full symphonies, funny workplace situations, past romances, and even enabled the recollection of supposedly long-forgotten conversations in impossible detail. But he couldn't do any of this safely or reliably. Even today, this method is only justifiable or ethical in the presence of uncontrollable and life-threatening brain disorders. And as a consequence, researchers from all over the world have spent the last 50 years almost singly focused on optimizing stimulation and discovering device materials and stimulating parameters that could be used safely under almost any circumstance. According to my wife, I've spent my best non-bald years working on these problems too. And the result of all of this work are some truly impressive technologies known as electroceuticals and neuroprosthetics. Some of these devices include cochlear implants to restore hearing, robotic arms and legs driven by implants in the motor cortex or other nerve bundles, artificial retinas for those with certain types of blindness, and a half dozen new implant targets for pacemakers to control pain, OCD, essential tremor, and bladder function. One of the things these amazing devices have in common is that they're invasive. In other words, they require that a device be placed inside the body and often deep inside the brain in order for it to do its work properly. As inconvenient as that sounds, the reason why it's necessary and so helpful is actually pretty simple. Imagine with me for a moment that you and your friend go to a Stone Temple Pilots concert. Now, if the 90s weren't your golden years like they were mine, you're welcome to think of a different band. But imagine with me for a moment that you and your friend are on the front row. You're actually excited to be there. And mid-song, and this one's really wild, you suddenly have something very important to tell your friend. And you absolutely have to get their attention without delay. Do you think it would be easiest to do this from 1 foot away? 20 feet away? The other side of the arena? Or maybe even from the car park entirely outside the building? Even if you could get this critical information to your friend from such a distance, do you think you could do it without disrupting the concert? Or telling what may be a secret to everyone in the audience in addition to your friend? In this analogy, the concert is your brain. The music is your natural brain activity. And everyone on stage and in the audience are neurons, each experiencing the music a little bit differently. Researchers have now spent decades experimenting with non-invasive neural stimulating and recording technologies, but have yet to surpass the power or capability of wires implanted directly in the target tissue with which we hope to communicate. For Parkinson's, dystonia, epilepsy, and other central nervous system disorders, this means implanting electrodes deep inside the brain so that electrical currents can be applied locally and privately without disrupting normal whole brain activity. Private, safe, and localized control of diseased nervous tissue is the goal of modern clinical devices. Above all, a device must do no harm, and the benefits of an implant must outweigh the risks of performing a surgery to implant a device. This has now become possible for many individuals and several types of disorders. Today, almost 1 million people have received some sort of neural implant, and many are taking to social media to tell their own stories post-implant. Parkinson's and dystonia patients sigh with relief when their tired muscles relax. Children cry when they hear their parents' voices again or for the first time. And many are now confident enough to return to work without fearing life-threatening seizures. But as amazing as all of this progress has been, the questions that always confront us are where are we going and what do we need to prepare for? I think the answer is quite obviously that we need to be prepared for anything that's possible. But in my opinion, we can't forget or ignore that Penfield teased us with a potentially powerful tool for helping to manage the tremendous mental health challenges that society faces today. And our current work seeks to advance these developments of the past into new and tangible methods of treating brain disorders. It was way back in 1936 that Penfield first demonstrated that implanted electrodes could be used to interact with cognition and with the construction of what we casually call ideas. In the simplest analogy I could come up with, the brain can be understood as an assembly line for ideas. Each region of the cortex collects sensory information such as what we see, hear, smell, or feel, and adds it to an experience, much the same way that a sandwich artist assembles lettuce, tomatoes, or pickles at your favorite deli. I'm curious though, which ingredient you all think it is that makes a sandwich a sandwich? Is it the bread, the meat, the cheese? Or is it just the way that it's all put together? In the human brain, there's a very particular region that's primarily responsible for assembling the ingredients of human experiences, and it's called the temporal cortex. This is our sandwich artist, so to speak. After that, there's another region called the hippocampus, that's responsible for converting these experiences into new long-term memories. It's here that our sandwich is eaten, and the brain decides how memorable an experience is. If either of these two structures were to misbehave or become damaged, the likely outcome would be that we would lose some of our ability to create and maintain new memories. And several disorders specifically target these two structures, including Alzheimer's, epilepsy, and a significant proportion of traumatic brain injuries as well. To return to our assembly line analogy, if it were found that our sandwich were missing cheese or the assembly line had run out, we might remove the product from the assembly line, add cheese off-site or at another location, and then return the product to the assembly line just downstream of the cheese station to continue assembling our sandwich. This simple process management approach, applied to cognitive implants, has resulted in an innovative hippocampal implant designed to support healthy memory creation. This potential device is designed to functionally replace a damaged hippocampus. Our research group here at USC, led by Dr. Ted Berger, with collaborators at Wake Forest and USC's Keck School of Medicine, have recently shown that when challenged with matching games designed to test one's memory, patients, real human patients, with this type of implant perform as much as 30% better than those without. This result is so important because it confirms that we can not only interact with real human memories, but we can improve memory formation in damaged brains. Unlike early neurosurgery experiments done by Penfield and others, this result is supported by more than just animal models, but was also studied using computational models to further justify the decisions that were made in the operating room. Simulating brain parts and prosthetics in a computer reduces the number of exploratory surgeries that need to be performed on animals and humans. It reduces the likelihood that costly mistakes will be made both in the operating room and in device design, and it deepens our understanding of the underlying mechanics of both brain disorders and brain-machine interfaces. The explosion of computing power over the last few decades has made it possible for us to build more and more complex models of brain parts, simulate them in a computer, and then use them to predict the effectiveness of different device designs. Beyond just being used in research and development, this approach is beginning to enter the clinic too. An individual who suffers from Parkinson's disease might seek a consultation from a neurologist who refers them to get a head MRI. Then, using a technique called diffusion tensor imaging or diffusion tensor tractography, clinicians can then build patient-specific whole head models that include detailed reconstructions of axon pathways within and between different regions of an individual's brain. We can then simulate these model reconstructions to optimize the features of different devices and find the best place within an individual's brain to put them. This approach has the potential to dramatically increase the likelihood that any given device will do the best job it can to reduce the frequency of seizures, control tremors, or perhaps even to restore one's ability to create and maintain memories. But most importantly, this approach can help us to ensure that these devices are used safely and appropriately. As an engineer, I'm focused on creating a technology that does a job as well as possible. Others, such as Penfield and Berger, have demonstrated what's possible with neuroprosthetics technologies. But this technology has all the characteristics of any modern technology, in that it's bigger than any one engineer, scientist, or physician. Materials science, electrophysiology, neurology, surgical techniques, computer modeling, imaging, blood, sweat, and tears have all gone into its development. Researchers of the utmost ability, integrity, and benevolence are leading the way. They are motivated to bring a little bit of life back to those who feel that theirs has been taken away. It's my hope that brain-computer interfaces and neuroprosthetics might one day help us to see past the disorder and know these people the way they want to be known. That is different because of who they choose to be and not because of what they cannot control. So when I ask you what it is that makes those who suffer from neurological disorders any different from you, I believe the answer could someday be that there's no discernible difference at all. Thank you.